Do you write code like this when you're trying to get random numbers between two values? Or like this when you're trying to get random numbers between two curves? Today we'll take a look at a better way to achieve this with a lot less code. Hey, Chris here from LlamAcademy, here to help you. Yes, you! Make your game dev dreams become a reality. If you're like me, you've probably tried to do random ranges in this fashion before using different variables to control min, max, and whatever else is going on. If you've used the particle system before, you've seen that there's this pretty cool control that allows you to do things like have a constant value, follow a curve, do random between two curves, and random between two constants. This is a really awesome control, but how can we use that in our own scripts? That's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to use the MinMaxCurve from the Unity Engine.Particle namespace, which allows us to implement this control on our own scripts. To demonstrate this, whenever we click on the screen, we're going to spawn a rectangle and scale it based on a random value based on this curve that we're going to define. We're going to multiply that by the position on the X and Y axis to make it where the top right of the screen will be really big, bottom left it'll be really small. But we'll also have it scale with some range, so that way it's not always the exact same if you click the exact same spot. Before we go any further, I want to give a huge shout out to all of my Patreon supporters. Every one of you is helping this channel grow, reach more people, and add value to more people, and that means more people are making their game dev dreams become a reality. If you want to help support that mission, you can go to patreon.com/LlamAcademy, choose whichever tier you're most comfortable with. You'll start getting some cool perks like getting your name up here in the section, and getting a voice shout out starting at the awesome tier. Speaking of those awesome supporters, I have Raphael, Andrew Bowen, Gerald Anderson, Autumn K, Paul Berry, and Matt Parkin. I am so grateful for your support. Thank you. I have an extremely simple scene this time. It's just a canvas that has a rectangle spawner script attached to it. That canvas has one child right now, and that's this gray background image. I am using the new input system in this video, but the difference between the new and the old in this case is very small. If we open up Visual Studio, in the rectangle spawner script, the first thing we'll do is put a required component, type of canvas. We'll add a couple of private serialized fields, a rect transform prefab, and the way that you might consider doing this, and the way I used to do this myself, would be I'd put two animation curves, a min curve and a max curve. Then on update, I would do something like check if the application is focused and I got the left mouse button was release this frame. I get the current mouse position, doing mouse.currentPosition.read value. Then we define something like a width multiplier equal to random range, passing in the min curve.evaluate current mouse position.x divided by the screen width, and the max curve.evaluate current mouse position.x divided by the screen width. Do the same thing for the height. Instantiate a new prefab at that location. And then finally set the instance.localScale to be instance.localScaleX times the width multiplier and the y times the height multiplier, and then keeping the original z. And this does work, but it's kind of annoying to type because you're doing the same thing multiple times for min and max. And then if you have more things that you want to have besides just this one, like we have scale that we're changing here. If you want something like, I don't know, rotation as well, then you have min max rotation, maybe min max scatter amount, something like that. You end up with just a lot of different min maxes that you don't actually need. And while defining these min max curves does work, it's a little bit challenging to tell the difference between one curve and the other curve in the inspector because they're on different variables. You can't have both of them up at the same time. So you're left to really guesswork on making sure that you have the two curves that are different enough. And it's just really hard to visualize with two separate fields that are totally disconnected. How do they relate to one another? Some of you that maybe have used particle systems extensively before already know that in the particle system editor, they have the ability to spawn particles where we can set it to be between two curves. They also have, like constant, random between two values, that kind of stuff. But since we're talking about curves right now, how do we get those? There must be a way to get those as well, right? You would be correct. What we can do is remove these min-max curves and replace it with something called a MinMaxCurve that comes from the Unity Engine particle system namespace. So if we do a private min-max curve, size curve, equal to a new min-max curve, and it accepts some arguments here so you can pass the default scale and two animation curves just to get it set up. Then all the stuff we have down below, we can go and change and make it much more simple. For the width multiplier, we can do sizeCurve.evaluate current mouse position.x divided by the screen width. And then the second argument there, actually, we can provide a random value. So much like any curve, whenever we're trying to evaluate it, you're passing in first the time you want to evaluate it at. That's that current mouse position.x divided by screen width, same as we were doing before. The second value is the interpolated amount between the two curves. That's why we're using a random value that gives us a random value between the two curves. If you pass a 0, then you're always going to get the bottom curve, and if you pass 1, you'll always get the top curve. For the height multiplier, we can do the exact same thing using the current mouse position.y and divide by the screen height, and again pass in a random value. Everything else is the same, but it makes it much more simple for us to get these two multipliers. And if we're talking about doing a lot of randomness, this saves a lot of typing or a lot of copy pasting that you can maybe forget to update something and get a wrong result. Let's really quickly take a look at how does this work in the Unity editor. On the canvas where we have the rectangle spawner, you can see we now have this field that just looks like a curve, but if I click on this and I start modifying it, we'll actually see that there are two curves available on this one property. I can adjust both curves and see in the same place what are the random ranges that I'm going to pick values between. If you already know how the particle system one works, this will be very familiar to you. If you're not very familiar with that, we can adjust the y value here and choose numbers greater than 1. So it'll pick random values between 0 and whatever number we pick. And you don't have to only use 0 and 1. We can choose any number for the start and the end points. It's using 1 because on that constructor, I provided a 1 as that first argument of the MinMaxCurve. And there's just one more thing I want to talk about here, because this MinMaxCurve is really powerful. In the inspector, there's this little drop-down arrow next to our curves. This allows us to change between those modes exactly like you see in the particle system editor. So we can have it where it's a fixed value. We can change modes into a curve value, random between two curves, and random between two constants. The two constants and the two curves are the only ones that actually consider that random.value that we passed in the second part of our evaluate call. The other ones obviously are only evaluating on, well, a constant or the first curve. So there's no need to interpolate between two values. So even if you're not using curves per se, but you want the ability to have it between two constants, you can still use the struct to get that result. I hope this helps you improve your workflow, reduce the amount of code that you have, and simplify the way that you generate random numbers while also making them more powerful. If you got value out of this video, please consider liking and subscribing to help the channel grow, reach more people, and add value to more people. There's new videos posted every Tutorial Tuesday, and I'll see you next week.